In this video, we'll take a look at Motion Mixer. Motion Mixer is a very interesting tool in Lightwave. It lets you do some very complicated or time-consuming things very quickly and easily, but it's also not without its own little idiosyncrasies and foibles. What is it at its heart? Well, it's a non-linear animation system. What it allows you to do is take finished animations or clips of animation and then just reuse and reapply them as clips, much like they were video clips in a video editor. Let's start out by having a look at a really simple example. We have here once again a simple camera with a wonderfully exciting piece of animation taking place, which I'm sure we've seen before. What we need to do first of all in Motion Mixer is to create an actor. You can see everything's grayed out really, and Motion Mixer is telling me that we have no actors currently defined. First off, what is an actor? Well, an actor is simply just a collection of items. It's not something like you might see in Motion Builder where you have the character object, which is a character system with a rig and everything else built in. It's not that at all. An actor in Motion Mixer is literally just a collection of items, very much like a selection set. This can of course be any number of items and any mix of item types. So we'll start out simply here with nothing but a camera and we'll create an actor out of it. We need to give it a name, so let's just call it Cam, shall we? And having done that, you see that suddenly the interface here springs to life. What we have shown over here are our tracks. We can right click and add tracks as we like. We can right click and remove tracks as we like. Again, this is just like a video editing program. You have different tracks that you can add clips into. Over here where we've created our actor, you can see that we have, first of all, the actor is active, which means that any clips that are applied in our timeline here will be pushed onto the actor. You can activate and deactivate that as you like. And in the menu here, you see that you have different options for adding or changing things in the item list. Clicking Add Items will add the currently selected items to your actor map or your actor selection set. In this case, you'll notice if I click it, it says that camera is already defined in the actor cam. That is because, of course, we had the camera selected when we created the actor, thus it was automatically added for us. You can remove the selected items. You can scan extra channels. You'll notice that no additional X channels were found. This doesn't mean X channels as in the X position channel. It means Lightwave's extra channels. You can choose Edit Actor Map that gives you a list of all items and extra channels that are included in the current actor, and you can turn them on or off as you see fit. And you can also do that on a channel by channel basis for different items. Or you can free actor, which basically removes all current items from the actor. So once you've got an actor, you need to have some kind of motion already, keyed on it. You need to have a keyframed motion created, as we have here for our camera. And when we have that, we can then create a motion. You'll see that we can give it a name, so let's just call it Move, shall we? The motion can be created from either all items that exist in the actor. So just as the actor is a selection set of items, motions are created based on sets of selections. You can do it for selected items only, and again for extra channels. Ordinarily, you're going to be doing it for whole actors. You can set a start and an end frame. In this case, it may as well be 60 because that's as long as my animation is. And if you want, you can clear channels, which basically deletes the frames from the timeline. The normal practice is to clear the channels, but you don't have to do that because, of course, when you apply motions to things via Motion Mixer, it will override any keyframes that are currently residing on the items anyway. For this example, we'll just leave it on, however. Once we've created a motion, we can then, look at things in the motion menu. So we can either add new items to the motion or remove them from it. We can load and save motions. We can copy them, rename them, or free them. Once we've got at least one motion though, we can click the Add Motion button. You see it lights up, and then you just click somewhere in one of the tracks and bingo, the motion appears there. we just line that up there with frame 0, then of course, nothing appears to have changed here, but actually it has, because now the item is being driven by this motion and not the keyframes that we had on it. So if we move this around, then what we'll see is that actually the motion is now taking place at this different point in time. Rather than starting back there on 0, it's starting, what's it here, on 28, and then of course progressing across there. So like this, we can just shove the motion around and push it to different points in time, like that. You can see these little bars at either side of the motion. That allows you to stretch or squash the motion, so you can speed it up, slow it down, very simply, just like that. If you right click on the motion clip and go to properties, you can of course see that that's there under the scale setting, so you can just reset that back down if you want to. You can also reset the start and end times for the motion, and you have pre and post behavior options here, which are very much similar to what you see in the graph editor. So you can, for instance, choose repeat like that. Let's click OK, and you see that you get this sort of post motion piece coming here, which is a repeat action, and you see of course that once you get into that it just keeps repeating. If you right click the post action, you can change what it is here, so let's set it to offset repeat, and of course what we see consequently there is that we have our initial motion, and that plays, and then off it goes in an offset repeat like that, continuing on forwards. If you need to change a motion, then you can just click on the motion here to select it, go to edit motion, and you see that suddenly we're back to our timeline here, and so we can go and start plonking some little changes in to edit what this motion is doing, like that. When we're done, we just uncheck edit motion, and we're given options here whether we want to accept what we've done or discard it. We can either restore the channels to layout, keep them as they are, or of course clear channels again, which is the more common thing to do. So let's click that there, and we see that of course our motion is now taking on its edited version like this. The channel editor over here allows you to edit what channels are being acted upon by a given motion. So for instance here, our motion only contains Y and Z animation, but you'll see that if I, for instance, uncheck the Y here, then when we're playing back our motion, suddenly it's only playing back the Z portion of it. It's not often that you really need to change any of these settings, nor that you would really want to, but perhaps occasionally. The offset editor, and this is something else, and this really comes into play once you have multiple motions. So we'll look again at that in a second. Because what we want to see with multiple motions, I'm just going to get rid of my repeat action there, is that of course what you can do is to take multiple motions and mix them together. So let us temporarily deactivate the actor, and you'll see that this allows me to once again manipulate him over here. So we'll come out to, let's say, I don't know, frame 10, right? And let's do a rotational movement. So let's put him up to here by frame 10, and then by frame 20, let's spin him back around to there. So all he's doing is just rotating purely on point like this. Great. Let's create a new motion. We'll call this roll. Again, actor items. This time it's 0 through frames 20. We'll choose clear channels, OK. We'll return our actor to being active. And look, there's our move motion going on there. Lovely. We've got roll in our motion list. So let's go add motion. Just click over here. And there is roll. So he does that move. And then he does the roll. Smashing. So here we've got a simple little edit where he does a move and then he does a roll. However, you'll notice, of course, that what's happening is he's completing his move and jumping back to his start position, at which point he executes the roll. We can bring the roll, butt it right up against the move there, and you'll see that it makes no difference. It gets to the end and it snaps back to the start. This is where the offset editor comes in. So let's go to the offset editor. We can see that we're currently offsetting roll. What do we want to offset it from? Well, from move. And what is the offset type? At the minute, it's absolute. That's why it jumps back, because of course our roll animation was performed over here at this point in space, at this position. So it's jumping to that position. If we change that to instead be relative, then what we see is it becomes relative to other motion positions. In this case, the move motion. Thus we see that he comes along, does his move, and then he rolls at that point there. What else can we do? Well, we can actually overlay the motion. So if we take roll and drag it down to this track instead, and let's just add a repeat to this, shall we? Add post behavior, drag this out, let's make it oscillate so it will ping pong back and forth, and just to have a quick look at that, we can deactivate the move track there just by unclicking the eyeball. We see that our roll is going ping pong, just like that. Lovely. If we now bring our move back into play, then what we see is that he moves and he rolls around on top of that motion. However, what we see is that the mixing isn't perfect because he's not turning right around. He's only turning halfway. Yep, he's not doing a full 180 degree, he's just doing a 90 degree turn and then going back and then back to 90 degrees again. So how can we fix this? After all, we've already done our offset to relative. We can't offset move against roll because that would be a circular reference. If you want to try it, you'll see that Motion Mixer simply rejects it. What we can do, however, is to add a weight curve here. You'll see this little green bar appear here. What we need to do is go and edit the weight curve. That pops up in a graph editor interface here. And you'll see that the weight is currently set here to 1. We'll see if we increase the weight to 2, the difference that we get. Let's bring our Motion Mixer back here so as we can look at it. Notice what we're getting now. Okay, it's turning further. It's still not going quite the full way around to its 180, but we're getting more of it. So let's try a higher value, shall we? The easiest thing to do is, of course, just find this point in time where it's at its maximum, like that. We'll just keep dialing this value up until, of course, we can reach the point where it is, as far round as we are wanting it to go. Now you see that by editing that weight, we are able to weight one motion on top of the other. The reason it wasn't doing it initially, of course, is because our move motion also had rotation keyed into it. It was rotated pointing forwards the whole time, as we can of course see again if we just turn off the roll motion there. As such, a simple 50-50 mix between the two meant that you're getting half pointed forwards, half pointed backwards, which is why it turned 90 degrees instead of the previous 180. So there you go. Those are the basics of Motion Mixer and all of the main stuff that you really need to know in order to use it. So what we'll do now is actually take a look at using it on a full character, just as we have right here. We've got our guy and he's doing his cute little walk cycle there. Just one single cycle, that's all we've got. So let's select all of his controllers here. Come over to Motion Mixer, create an actor. We'll just call him Guy, shall we? Of course, notice that has added all of his null controllers, but this guy also has bones. That's fine. We can select the bones as well, come to our actor and just add those items. Now let's look at our motion here. We see that it goes from frame 0 to frame 24. That's our last moment. So let's create that motion. We'll just call it walk. Actor items, we want it up to 24. We may as well clear the channels. Click OK. Go to add motion. We've got walk selected from our motion list. Let's plop it in. And there we go. There's our walk seemingly back on again. If we want, we can add this a few more times. You plop it in like that. Of course, that means that he walks once, then snaps back and walks again. Notice this is walk and walk 01. If we go to the offset editor, we can take the walk 01 motion, offset that from walk, change it to relative, and now, of course, he continues walking from the spot where the last one finishes. Doing this, of course, is no different. Let's just remove that motion. Than if we were to add a post behavior. Choosing repeat, of course, would give us what we had initially there, but just like in Graph Editor, if we choose offset repeat, then we see that our walk just keeps on going and going and going, and we can drag this repeating behavior out like this for as long as we want, and our little guy will carry on walking off into the distance. Now, there's also something else we can do which is better demonstrated on this example. and which we didn't talk about before, and that's this option here, Add Time Warp Curve. Time Warp Curve pops up there, it's a little red line. See, everything's going a little clunky for a second, basically because it's misbehaving over the repeat there, as you see. Otherwise, let's look at what the Time Warp Curve does for us. So we go into Edit It. Now, Time Warp Curves are a little weird if you're not used to them. They take a little bit of getting used to. And what they simply allow you to do is, obviously, as their name implies, warp time. Here's how it works. At the minute, our motion, goes from frame 0 to frame 24. As we see, the time warp curve here is marked in percentages. How much of the animation has played back. At frame 0, that is currently 0%. At frame 24, it is 100%. Now, if we try and drag this out, you might think, okay, if you want to slow the motion down, then we can drag it out some, let's say frame 50 odd. You will notice, let me just put this over here for illustration, if I click back here, bum, that jumps back. Why is that? Well, it's because, of course, our motion only contains 24 frames. If we want to time stretch it, we of course just time stretch it here, like this. This curve is for time warping, and the start and end frames of the time warp curve will always be the same length of the original animation, no matter how much longer or shorter you make it. So here's what I'll do, right? I'm going to come about halfway-ish, like this, and I'll put a key in the time warp curve somewhere there. Let's just move it down a little bit, shall we? And I'll just sort of TCB, spline the whole thing here and do an ease in and ease out at the beginning and end there. What we now see happens is that our guy starts off, look, walking in slow motion. Yep, he's easing into the motion and then starts to speed up and then slows down again right at the end of the motion there. Let's just get rid of that offset repeat for now so as we can take a good close-up look at it. I'll put my frame here back to 24 and let's just center in on our character here so as we can actually view him properly, shall we? See what we're doing? We've warped his time. We're getting this slow into the motion, this fast through the middle, and then this slow out again. That's what time warping is. It's different to time stretching the whole motion. You can do other fun stuff with this as well. So let's say we just take this key and I'm just going to nudge it over there. I'm going to create another key and I'll plop it down there like this. What happens to him now? Well, he starts going forwards, then he starts going backwards. It's happening very fast here. Let me show you again quite clearly. See, he's starting to go forwards, hits this frame there, and his motion then winds backwards, all the way back to very near the beginning. Then it starts going forwards again. This is time warping, and what it really allows you to do is take some beautiful, smooth precision control over the timing of a motion. Rather than, fudging around with keys in the editors. If you've managed to get an animation out that's nice and smooth and reasonably complete, but having done all of this work, you then discover that you need to retime it a bit. You need to speed a little section up, or you need one of the transitions to happen a bit faster. Or perhaps one of the other transitions somewhere you just want to slow out and just extend a little bit. Then going back in and having to edit all of the keys on all of the items and so forth can leave you with a bit of a headache. It can take you a little while to do, especially on a finished animation. The answer is Motion Mixer's Time Warp, as it really does allow you to do this really nice and simple little adjustments to really just squeeze time and push it around to make the motion perform just that little bit differently, like this. And of course, when you add that into the fact that the motion as a whole can be stretched and squashed in time like this, then you can see, of course, the wonderful power that this has to allow you to reshape finished animations. So let's just knock that out for now. We'll get rid of the time warp curve on that, so it's back to standard, and I'm also just going to put it back to its original size, or its original scale, which was 100% there. Right, that's all okay. The last thing I want to look at then in Motion Mixer here is the blending of multiple motions together on, entire characters. That camera example was clearly very simple, let's have a look at actually how it works when you've got a full character going on. So what I'm going to do is go to load motion, and as it happens I already have a saved motion here, jump. I'm going to add that motion and just drop it into the timeline there. I will of course want to expand my timeline back out again, and you'll probably recognize this as the little jump animation that we've seen on this guy before. This reminds us of something very important when, loading and saving motions and using them in Motion Mixer, and of course the nature of the actor. The only reason I am able to load up this jump motion and have it play back on this rig is because it was created on this rig. What Motion Mixer will not allow you to do is to take a motion that you've created on one character and put it on another character. At least not unless they share the exact same rig. That of course would involve having the same controllers with the same names and everything else. Obviously, if you're using something like Genoma or Rigit, then that becomes a distinct possibility, as you can take one rig and you can refit it to multiple meshes. That's great, and in such an instance, yes, you could have motions animated on one character and apply them to another one. However, any proportional or size differences in the characters will not be taken into account. What Motion Mixer does not do is any kind of retargeting between characters. That allowed for, though, presuming that you've got motions that, are set up for or are working on the character that you've got, loaded into your Motion Mixer. How can we go about, mixing these things together? Well, what we can do is we can take our jump animation here, we can come into the offset editor, we can offset it from walk like this, change it of course to relative, and what we see happens now is he comes to the end of his walk like that, and then boom, into his jump like this. Now we see a couple of kooky things happening with it. First of all, of course, now that he's jumping, he's not doing it from feet together. His feet are spaced apart in, the pose that they were in at the end of the walk there. And also at the end of the walk, this leading foot was tipped up. And so now that we're coming into the other motion, it remains tipped up. So that's a bit unfortunate. Also, look at what's happening to the arms. In the walk, they're sort of up here being carried high. But in the jump, they do an entirely different motion, and now they're sort of just, turning upside down and going through him. What we see is that relative isn't actually the right mode, or at least not for everything. So let's come back into our offset editor. Let's just set it all back to absolute. It'll tell me that I'm removing the offset, so yes. So I've got jump again, and I'm thinking, which items do I actually want to be relative to my walk? Well, of course, what we have here is the fact that you've got all of these controls, but there's only 3 that are actually moving along in the world space here. And that is the main root controller, as well as these 2 foot main control items. So what I'm going to do in my offset editor is to do offset from walk, leave it at absolute, but we'll see that I can change by going to custom all of these little settings here. So control HPB, that's control HPB1, which is his root item there. I can then find foot floor control, that's going to be one of these guys. So I'll click to set that to relative, and then I'll just look until I find the other one. There it is, foot floor control, relative. And now, of course, what we see is that we get a different action taking place there. We've got a much better sort of blend between the two like this. What we can see though is, some of these bits are a little bit wrong still. I mean, his hip is, his root there, it's tipping too far forward because of course it's tipped forward at the end of the walk, so that's coming in relatively. If we have a look, we'll find that there are actually different options. You can set it to rel XZ only. That's not quite right because of course then we're losing the pop on the Y, or it suddenly jumps up on the Y, which is kind of incorrect. But we can also set it to car, where you can compensate the angle. Notice now that holds him much cleaner at his root position there. So it's looking better, but it still kind of stutters a bit, and you see, of course, that as he comes into the motion, look, he snaps very swiftly there. Of course, that is because one motion is ending, like his arms pose up here, and then, of course, we're jumping straight to this other arms pose of them by his side. How can we fix that? Well, with the last tool available to us here in Motion Mixer, which is the transition. All we do is we select the walk motion here, click Add Transition, and you'll see that it prompts us, select second motion. So I select jump, and now you see that this little transition block has appeared. What we see happens now is that we get this glide between the end of one motion pose and the beginning of another one there. It is, I think, kind of plain and not particularly attractive, but you can notice the type of transition written down here is linear. If we right click on it, we can edit transition. What do you know? Once again, we have a curve here, so we can adjust, how that transition eases in and out between the two, which is really nice. So again, a little bit of editing there helps you out somewhat. You can tween the transition if you want that way. But by far the easier way to do it is to have a time overlap between them. So we can just put the jump onto the next track. And now, of course, what we see happening is that we gradually blend out of the walk and in to the jump. We can stretch it out a little further if we're wanting, so as the blend time and size is a little greater. Obviously, what we can see as well is the difference on the foot goal positions and precisely when in time it is that the foot goals are blending over. This, of course, is where we see that, Motion Mixer can start to get a bit twitchy, because, of course, it becomes very difficult to edit, the exact positions of things like where the foot goals are landing. You can attempt to create new motions that compensate for this and then layer them over. But unfortunately, Motion Mixer isn't really an animation layer system in the same way that you see animation layers working in some other softwares. However, it does give you a good amount of simple blending between motions like this, which you can at least have a shot at editing manually. If you are wanting to do that, to actually come and, be able to edit mixed motions, you can't just go to Edit Motion, because that only allows you to edit one individual motion clip. What you really need to do is to come out of Motion Mixer and put this all back into keyframes. You can do this simply enough by using the Bake Range button here. As you see, it warns you that it'll overwrite any animation. You can click yes. You give it the range which you're wishing to bake, and you can, in fact, once you've baked a motion, turn it into a Motion Mixer clip automatically straight away. However, we won't. We'll just click OK. Timeline rattles along. We can now deactivate the actor. And what we see over here now in the viewport is that there's our motion fully keyed. The only problem with it is that Motion Mixer doesn't respect your initial keys. It doesn't just replace the keyframes that you had into the timeline. As you can see, it performs a full bake. In this case, it's done 1 frame per frame, as that was the step size that I had indicated on the Motion Mixer panel. And of course, now having this might be a little bit of a pain to, of course, come in and edit, as baked frames always are. You can, however, of course, jump into your graph editor, start, getting positions and rotations for things, and manually offset chunks of frames or reduce frames as necessary. In a case like this where you've got a long hold where that foot is actually flat there, you can make use of tools in the animation toolbox, such as the Reduce Basic filter here. You see how that cleans up and reduces your keyframes there. Click OK for that, and also click Apply. And so now it's worked out a lot of those, flat baked frames like that, which gives me a better shot at being able to edit this if I do want to. And that, unfortunately, is one of the other little foibles of Motion Mixer. Whilst there's no kind of animation layering to allow you to go and correct any of these positions within Motion Mixer itself particularly easily, it's also the case that if you want to bake out of Motion Mixer and come back into just normal editing in graph, timeline, whatever else, that you get stuck with these solidly baked keys for the motion that you then have to do some work to reduce in order to be able to lay in, the tweaks and changes and edits that you want. However, in spite of these little, issues that are perhaps imperfect or could be better, Motion Mixer does have a lot of useful functionality in it. If you are just whipping up a quick cycle that you need to repeat for something, it's brilliant. And of course, once you have gotten to the point of a finished animation, being able then to take that and time warp it to perform even finer adjustments of the timing over time is a wonderful, wonderful tool to have.